Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the world's most influential, sometimes impenetrable, organizations and turn their history, their structure, and their internal conflicts into genuinely surprising and actionable knowledge for you.
Today, we are taking on a real behemoth of global conservation, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN.
Right. This is an organization that, for decades, has literally provided the global rulebook for how we define a protected species, how land should be managed, and, crucially, what conservation actually means.
It really has. And many people, that they'll know the IUCN for its most famous output, the universally recognized Red List of threatened species.
Exactly. If you see a headline announcing that a species is vulnerable or endangered or critically endangered, well, that verdict comes directly from the scientific consensus that's generated by this institution.
But their global scope goes so far beyond just compiling lists of animals.
Yeah.
The IUCN is, and this isn't an exaggeration, the established global authority on the status of the natural world.
So what's their mission exactly?
Well, their official mission, which is dense and has changed quite a bit since 1948, is now to influence, encourage, and assist societies throughout the world to conserve nature and to ensure that any use of natural resources is equitable and ecologically sustainable.
That is a sprawling, hefty mandate. It's trying to bridge science, policy, and social justice all at once.
It is. But here is the most crucial distinction and maybe the most surprising thing about the IUCN. Unlike groups like Greenpeace or even the World Wildlife Fund.
Which, fascinatingly, the IUCN actually helped create.
Exactly. Unlike them, the IUCN does not aim to mobilize the general public. That's not their game at all.
So they're not about protests or public petitions.
No, precisely. Their influence is all wielded through technical expertise and high-level diplomacy. Their strategy is completely focused on influencing governments, major UN agencies, massive corporations, powerful stakeholders. They provide the science and the policy frameworks that everyone else then uses.
So they write the script for global environmental policy. But, and this is the real hook for our deep dive today, they are navigating some truly foundational internal divisions.
Oh, absolutely. Divisions over the very definition of conservation, especially around their, let's say, deepening and often controversial ties to the corporate world.
And the really high-stakes adoption of technologies like genetic engineering in a wild species.
It's a moment where their historical principles are just colliding head-on with pressures of the modern world. I mean, they're being forced to decide if they are primarily a body dedicated to, precautionary ethics, or one that has to embrace every single tool available to stop extinction.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack all of that. We're going to trace the history of the IUCN from its financially shaky post-war founding in 1948 all the way to the razor-thin votes in 2025 that determine their policy on using synthetic biology in the wild. So let's start at the very beginning. The genesis of this massive global organization. It was established October 5, 1948 in Fontainebleau, France.
And what's really notable is that it wasn't founded by, grassroots conservationists. This was a very formal post-war effort. The initiative was really spurred by UNESCO.
And that UNESCO connection is key, right?
It's the key to understanding their early identity. The push came directly from UNESCO's first Director General, the eminent British biologist Julian Huxley. You have to remember the context here. The world was just emerging from a devastating global war. The focus was on rebuilding societies, economies, political structures.
And Huxley saw that conservation was part of that, not separate from it.
Exactly. He recognized that conserving nature was a necessary, integrated component of global recovery. And this recognition led to the formation of the International Union for the Protection of Nature, or IUPN as it was first called.
And the scope was ambitious right from the get-go.
It really was. At its founding, the IUPN was unique. It was the only international organization focusing on the entire spectrum of nature conservation, not just one animal or one region, but the whole relationship between human society and the natural world globally.
But those early years, from about 1948 through the mid-50s, they were marked by some pretty severe financial instability, weren't they?
That's a perfect way to put it. They were rich in ideas, but very poor in execution. The organization was almost entirely dependent on financial support from UNESCO.
Which is a problem when the funding stops.
It proved catastrophic. That funding just ceased in 1954. And the IUPN was basically forced to temporarily close shop. They had to dramatically scale down everything because they just lacked the independent resources to do anything.
Wow.
We even have stories about the incredible dedication of the people involved. One of their early Secretary Generals, a man named Tracy Phillips, reportedly didn't draw a salary for his entire tenure from 1955 to 1958 just because the finances were so tight.
That's dedication.
Yeah.
So this crisis, this financial crunch, it seems like it was the catalyst for their evolution.
It was. In 1956, they formally changed their name to the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, the IUCN we know today. They adopted that much broader term, conservation.
And this leads us to the 1960s, where they really started to establish their authority.
Two critical milestones. First, the intellectual foundation. In 1964, the IUCN published the first ever red data book on the conservation status of species. That act defining and categorizing global species risk based on rigorous science, it immediately cemented them as the authoritative scientific body.
But the money problem was still there.
The fundamental problem of funding remained, and this is where the famous and very strategic partnership with the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, was forged.
Right, and this relationship is often misunderstood, but it was absolutely critical for IUCN's survival.
It was a partnership of necessity and of synergy. In 1961, the IUCN actively helped establish the World Wildlife Fund, specifically to solve that financial deficit. The division of labor was crystal clear.
So WWF would handle the public-facing stuff.
Exactly. WWF was set up to handle fundraising, public relations, increasing public support, all the things that IUCN had proven it couldn't do effectively. In exchange, WWF covered a big chunk of IUCN's operational costs.
Which freed up the IUCN to focus on what they do best, the science and the policy.
That's it. It was a conscious, strategic choice. IUCN provides the gold standard research. WWF provides the public face and the funding. And that synergy paid massive dividends in consolidating their international political authority.
Especially as they headed towards that groundbreaking 1972 Stockholm Conference.
That's right. Between about 66 and 75, the IUCN just embedded itself into the machinery of global governance. A key move was successfully lobbying the UN General Assembly for Resolution 1296 in 1968.
And what did that do?
It created the formal consultative status for non-governmental organizations. This was a huge diplomatic breakthrough for the whole NGO sector, and the IUCN was a primary beneficiary.
So they were no longer just observers, they were at the table.
They were invited to the table to help draft and implement major global treaties. Their fingerprints are everywhere after the 1972 Stockholm Conference.
Okay, give us the key examples.
Well, take the World Heritage Convention of 1972. The IUCN co-drafted this with UNESCO, and crucially, it remains the official advisory body on nature. So when a government wants to nominate a natural site, like the Galapagos or the Serengeti, for World Heritage status...
It's the IUCN that does the scientific evaluation.
Exactly. Then there's CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species.
The one that regulates the multi-billion-dollar wildlife trade?
Right. CITES came into force in 1974. IUCN was a signatory party, and the CITES Secretariat was originally housed within the IUCN's offices. And finally, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, which came into force in 75. The Secretariat for that treaty is still administered from IUCN's headquarters in Gland, Switzerland.
That is an astonishing level of integration. It shows they went from a shaky think tank to an essential engine of global treaties just about 25 years, which I guess gave them the footing to tackle the next big challenge, redefining what conservation even means.
Yes, that consolidation of authority in the 70s really made the organization look in the mirror. They realized their traditional approach was, well, fundamentally flawed, particularly for conservation in the Global South.
And this is where that big philosophical evolution starts, right? The shift from the old protection mindset to the sustainable development paradigm. Why did that initial model fail?
It failed because it was too narrow, too exclusive, and often, frankly, culturally biased. The early model was rooted in what's called the Yellowstone model.
Which is the idea that conservation means drawing a line around a pristine area and just kicking everyone out.
Basically, yes, ensuring the total removal or exclusion of human populations. In developed nations, this created national parks. But in the Global South, it often led to direct conflict and displacement of local people, completely disregarding their economic and social needs.
So if you're protecting nature against local communities, it just becomes completely unsustainable.
Exactly. And this realization, which was driven by reports from the field and pressure from their developing member states, it forced the IUCN to draft the Foundational World Conservation Strategy, published in 1980.
And what did that strategy argue?
It was a landmark. It argued that the conservation of nature must be integrated with development objectives. You cannot save an ecosystem if the local population has no sustainable economic alternative to exploiting it. It's that simple.
And that idea was then formalized globally.
Yes. When the UN General Assembly adopted the World Charter for Nature in 1982, a document that was mostly prepared by the IUCN. And at the same time, the organization itself started a major structural change to reflect this new philosophy.
How so?
In 1982, they established the Conservation for Development Center inside the Secretariat. This wasn't just a new name. This center was mandated to integrate nature conservation directly into development aid projects and the economic policies of developing countries.
And power started shifting.
It did. Power began shifting away from the historically dominant, largely Western volunteer commissions and more toward the professional staff who were actually working in the field.
So we see this decentralization. Management moves out to the regional and country offices. They now have offices in over 50 countries, so strategies are being managed on the ground.
And the whole thing culminates in 1994, when the IUCN mission statement was officially redrafted. And this is the key phrase they added: the necessity to ensure that any use of natural resources is equitable and ecologically sustainable.
Equitable. That one word changes everything.
It elevates social justice to the same level as ecological concern.
And if you have to address equity and sustainability, you can't ignore the economic engine of society, which means you have to engage with business.
That is the direct line to the next major organizational shift, the business nexus, starting in the late 90s. The IUCN's own members passed a pivotal resolution in 1996 urging the expansion of dialogue and productive relationships with the private sector.
So the goal was to influence business practices from the inside, rather than just condemn them from the outside.
Exactly. And that led to the Global Business and Biodiversity Program, or BBP, in 2003. It's designed to influence and support private partners, to get them to integrate biodiversity conservation into their core operations, not just their PR departments.
But this is where the internal divisions and the external criticism really start to ramp up, because the partnerships have included some of the world's most environmentally impactful corporations.
They certainly have. I mean, the most prominent and consistently controversial example is the collaboration IUCN started with the energy company Shell International in 2007.
And the argument from the IUCN was that by engaging with a company like Shell, they could influence their policies toward greater sustainability.
Right. In areas like habitat restoration or biodiversity net gain.
Yeah.
But critics, especially activist environmental groups, they argued that this relationship just lent IUCN's immense credibility to a company fundamentally involved in fossil fuels.
A textbook case of greenwashing.
That was the charge. And that criticism was amplified by other partnerships, like the one with Coca-Cola in Vietnam. They collaborated on launching what were called Coca-Cola-focused community centers, supposedly aimed at water stewardship.
But critics pointed out the contradiction there.
The inherent contradiction, yes. A company that relies on massive water withdrawal, often in stressed areas, can't really be water neutral. The fear was that the partnership risked sanitizing a corporate image without achieving real, systemic ecological change.
It's a real balancing act. But moving on from the controversies, after 2009, the IUCN started championing another major conceptual framework: nature-based solutions, or NBS.
NBS is essentially the strategic outcome of that whole sustainable development shift. It's the explicit recognition that healthy, functioning ecosystems provide necessary services that address major societal challenges.
Give us a concrete example.
Okay, so if a coastal city is facing rising sea levels and more intense storms, the conventional engineering solution might be to build a huge, expensive concrete seawall. The nature-based solution approach says, wait, let's look at the ecosystem. So that might mean restoring coastal mangroves or revitalizing coral reefs. These are living systems that provide highly effective coastal defense. They mitigate erosion, they sequester carbon, and they improve biodiversity all at the same time.
And the IUCN formally cemented this concept at the 2016 World Conservation Congress.
They did. The members officially agreed on the definition of NBS, making it a cornerstone of modern IUCN policy. It really signifies their commitment to these integrated, holistic solutions.
Okay, so we've tracked the history and the philosophical evolution. Now we need to understand how the IUCN actually turns this philosophy into global action, because its structure is so unique. It's not quite an NGO, not quite a governmental body. It's a hybrid.
That hybrid structure is their secret weapon. It gives them unparalleled influence. IUCN's membership is a dynamic combination of over 1,400 entities spread across more than 170 countries, and that membership includes sovereign states.
So countries themselves?
Countries, yes, and government agencies, like environmental protection departments. major international NGOs, and thousands of national NGOs.
It's like a conservation parliament. So when a country or a big group like the Nature Conservancy wants to shape the global agenda, they become an IUCN member and they get a vote.
Exactly. And that vote is cast at the World Conservation Congress, which meets every 4 years. That's where they elect the council, approve the work program, and most importantly, they debate and vote on resolutions that effectively set the global agenda.
And that membership has even expanded recently to be more equitable, right?
Yes, new categories were created for indigenous peoples organizations in 2016 and for subnational governments like states or provinces in 2021.
But the real power behind the organization is the Secretariat and this massive network of volunteer experts in the commissions.
Right. The Secretariat has over 900 full-time staff worldwide handling the day-to-day operations. But the volunteer network, that's the engine room of their scientific authority.
We're talking about 16,000 scientists and experts participating voluntarily. That's an army of expertise that no single government could possibly replicate.
And they're organized into these commissions where the scientific know-how is assessed, peer-reviewed, and then translated into policy advice. Let's touch on the three most influential ones.
First, the most famous, the Species Survival Commission, SSC.
The SSC is the technical arm for species conservation. They prepare detailed species action plans, and most famously, they produce the IUCN Red List of threatened species. They're the ones who assess the risk of extinction based on rigorous standardized criteria.
So they decide if a species is vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. Then you have the World Commission on Protected Areas, WCPA. This is about place, not just species.
Exactly. The WCPA is essential because they manage the global system of IUCN protected area categories. When a country designates a national park, they're often using IUCN categories, Category 1, Category 2, and so on.
So they influence how reserves are set up and run all over the world. And then, reflecting that social and economic shift we talked about, there's the Commission on Environmental, Economic, and Social Policy, CESP.
The CESP is the policy bridge. Their focus is explicitly on the economic and social factors needed for conservation. They make sure the ecological plans are feasible and equitable. They're the ones who embody that equitable mandate.
And the organization is responsive. They just added a Climate Crisis Commission in 2021, which shows they can adapt pretty quickly.
They can. And their outputs go way beyond the species red list. They also produce the IUCN Red List of Ecosystems, which does the same thing for, forests, wetlands, and so on.
And finally, they don't just list what should be protected. They rate how well we're actually doing it with the Green List of protected and conserved areas.
Right. The Green List is a global standard for quality.
Right.
It determines if a protected area is being effectively and equitably managed. It's a quality assurance mechanism for conservation on the ground, further cementing the IUCN as the ultimate standard setter for both the science and the management. So now that we understand the immense scope and power of the IUCN, we have to turn to the flip side of that power, the criticism. Because of its hybrid nature, it faces criticism from all angles.
Let's start with the historical criticism, which goes right back to that original protection mindset. They were often accused of fortress conservation prioritizing nature above people.
That early Yellowstone model was deeply problematic in many parts of the world. It called for setting aside pristine wilderness by, removing all human inhabitants. And the best-known, most controversial case study involves the Maasai people in Tanzania.
Right. The expulsion of the Maasai from the Serengeti National Park and the ongoing conflicts in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. That's the poster child for this approach.
It is. It shows the devastating human cost when conservation is prioritized over human rights and traditional livelihoods. That historical critique really suggests the IUCN, at least until the 80s, prioritized a sort of Western romantic vision of untouched wilderness over the sustainable practices of local and indigenous communities.
And that fed a broader critique that the IUCN was historically northern-focused.
It did. The organization's origins, with figures tied to groups like the British Society for the Preservation of the Wild Fauna of Empire, that context is undeniable. Critics argued that the early aim was sometimes framed to protect species against indigenous hunting, maybe to safeguard sport hunting opportunities for Europeans.
And while the organization has diversified dramatically since then, that feeling that the agenda was being sent far away from the regions most affected, that lingered.
It did. But fast forward to today, and the criticism is no longer about historical displacement. It's about the contemporary issues created by their equitable mandate and those corporate ties, specifically allegations of greenwashing.
So once you decide you have to work with industry, You open yourself up to the charge of compromise.
Absolutely. Activist environmental groups argue that the IUCN is now too closely associated with powerful governments and the commercial sector, and that it's compromising its independence.
So with the Shell partnership, the argument was that no matter what good projects came out of it, it was still a powerful green endorsement for a fossil fuel company.
Yes, that it allowed Shell to offset the damage of its core business by pointing to small-scale conservation victories facilitated by the IUCN. Critics felt the risk to IUCN's integrity was just too high.
And the Coca-Cola partnership in Vietnam hit that same nerve, but specifically around the idea of equitable resource use.
Precisely. Coca-Cola uses immense amounts of water, often in water-stressed regions. Critics argue that even if the partnership resulted in community centers focused on water stewardship, it fundamentally masked the company's larger negative impact on local water security. It failed the test of true sustainability and equity.
It's clear the organization is in the crosshairs, but all of these controversies, historical and modern, they seem to have coalesced into one single high-stakes showdown that defines their direction today.
The synthetic biology showdown of 2025. This is the definitive turning point. In October 2025, the IUCN World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi became the global battleground for whether high-tech, man-made intervention has a legitimate role in conservation.
The debate was about genetic engineering. Why did this specific technology trigger such a fierce fight?
Well, synthetic biology in this context means engineering wild species. For example, creating a genetically modified coral that's resistant to heat stress, or an engineered fungus that only targets invasive pests.
So for critics, this is a dangerous move. It sacrifices the precautionary principle for high-risk tech fixes.
But for proponents, it's the only viable option left in a world facing accelerating climate change and habitat collapse. And the debate came down to two competing motions.
Okay, what were they?
First, we had Motion 133. This was backed by those who favored caution. It proposed a sweeping precautionary pause on the genetic engineering of wild species. They argued the long-term consequences are unknown and potentially irreversible, so we needed to halt everything.
And on the other side?
On the other side was Motion 087. This represented the pragmatists. Instead of a blanket pause, it advocated for a structured framework allowing the case-by-case evaluation of genetic technologies. They argued these tools are necessary to save species from threats that traditional conservation can no longer handle.
The stakes were huge for the future of conservation, and the result was breathtakingly close.
It was a democratic knife edge. Motion 133, the one calling for the precautionary pause, was defeated by a margin of a single vote.
One vote.
One vote prevented the IUCN from adopting a position of caution against genetic technologies. And immediately after that, Motion 087, the one to embrace the policy framework, was adopted with a significant majority.
Wow. So the implication is?
The implication is clear. The IUCN, the global standard setter, now has an official policy framework that accepts genetic engineering as a potential tool in the conservation arsenal. Conservation policy has moved decisively into the realm of high-tech intervention.
And the reaction from critics was probably severe.
Immediate and severe. They characterize it as a huge victory for biotech lobbyists and a betrayal of conservation's first principles, the idea that nature should be protected, not engineered. But for proponents, the vote was a necessary and responsible recognition that a science-driven body has to adapt. It's a turning point that will redefine the organization for the next century.
So this deep dive has really revealed an organization defined by dynamic and often contentious evolution. It started as the small, financially precarious post-war protection union.
And it's grown into this massive, structurally complex global organization that has successfully integrated sustainable development, business engagement, and now high-stakes genetic engineering right into its mission. And we can't overlook the sheer success of their standard-setting role. I mean, when we look at global conservation metrics, we're looking at IUCN's influence. Their reports show measurable progress. A 2014 report confirmed the world had established 209,000 conservation reserves, covering 15.4% of the total land area.
Which put the world on track to meet the 17% protection goal set back in 2010.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner tracking global policy and ethics? It means that every major conservation decision, from which species gets immediate attention to how a national park is run, it all flows from the authoritative framework defined by this one institution.
Their World Conservation Congress doesn't just discuss the environmental agenda, it literally sets it.
But the key to their mission, The thing that makes them this continuous target for criticism remains their commitment to ensuring that the use of natural resources is equitable and ecologically sustainable.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought. The IUCN has now established a policy framework that embraces synthetic biology, a technology that's inherently high stakes, expensive, and deeply linked to powerful corporate and scientific interests.
So, if the historical mistake of the Yellowstone model was prioritizing nature over the needs of local communities, what measures will prevent this new high-tech model from repeating that exact same error?
That's the critical challenge for them now, ensuring that the high-tech, business-linked future of synthetic biology remains truly equitable. How do you guarantee that decisions involving advanced genetic modification don't just favor elite scientific solutions and corporate profits over the sovereignty, knowledge, and needs of those very same local communities whose cooperation is essential?
What new ethical red lists focused on socioeconomic impact need to be created alongside the red list of threatened species? That tension between powerful, expensive technology and equitable application, that is the ethical tightrope that will define the IUCN's legitimacy and success for the foreseeable future.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the International Union for Conservation of Nature. We'll see you next time.